So, hello and welcome back yet again to another chapter as we near the end of A Tale of Two Cities. We're getting closer and closer to the end, and I can kind of get an idea of what I think is going to happen. I mean, I'm still pretty sure I did read this book in junior high, but evidently I don't remember a lot of it. But I'm pretty sure I kind of remember what happens at the end, but we'll see if my memory is right or not. I feel like they're really setting up old Cindy, old Sydney to be kind of going to maybe make some sort of grand sacrifice that will fix everything. I don't know. We'll see if that is true or not, but we don't have very many chapters left. We should be finishing this up next week. This is our last chapter of this week-ish, as I will be taking Friday off, as I always do for my live stream, which if things work out the way they're supposed to, I might even have some guest stars on my live stream. My son and his husband should be getting in tomorrow. Tomorrow my time, which should be when this goes up your time. Hopefully. Fingers crossed and all of that jazz. But yeah, they should be here for the live stream. I'm sure they will at least pop in to say hello. I say I'm sure, they might not, who knows? But anyway, all of that is just sort of fluff and nonsense. We will be finishing this book next week, and then I will put a poll up to see what our next public domain book is. I think we have 3 very good choices for our next book. None of them are Dickens. I like this story. I just wish it weren't buried under so much stuff that you have to dig through. Again, I did find out that Charles Dickens was not paid by the word, although given how many he liked to use, I still think it might have been true. Like, that was a rumor I totally could get behind. But we're almost there, and the story seems to be taking on a bit more substance towards the end, which I am very glad for. So we're going to jump back into book 3 of A Tale of Two Cities with chapter 10, The Substance of the Shadow. And picking up with the doctor's letter. I, Alexandre Manette, unfortunate physician, native of Bouvard and afterwards a resident in Paris, write this melancholy paper in my doleful cell in the Bastille during the last month of the year 1767. I write it at stolen intervals, under every difficulty. I design to secrete it in the wall of the chimney, where I have slowly and laboriously made a place of concealment for it. Some pitying hand may find it there, when I and my sorrow are dust. These words are formed by the rusty iron point with which I write with difficulty in scrapings of soot and charcoal from the chimney mixed with blood during the last month in the 10th year of my captivity. Hope has quite departed from my breast. I know from terrible warnings I have noted in myself that my reason will not long remain unimpaired, but I solemnly declare that I am at this time in possession of my right mind, that my memory is exact and circumstantial, and that I write the truth as I shall answer for these, my last recorded words, whether they ever be read by men or not, at the eternal seat of judgment. One cloudy moonlit night, in the 3rd week of December, I think the 22nd of the month, of the year 1757, I was walking on a retired part of the quay by the Seine for the refreshment of the frosty air at an hour's distance from my place of residence in the school of the street of medicine, when a carriage came along behind me, driven very fast. As I stood aside to let that carriage pass, apprehensive that it might otherwise run me down, a head was put out at the window and a voice called the driver to stop. The carriage stopped as soon as the driver could rein in his horses, and the same voice called to me by my name. I answered. The carriage was then so far in advance of me that two gentlemen had time to open the door and alight before I came up with it. I observed that they were both wrapped in cloaks and appeared to conceal themselves. As they stood side by side near the carriage door, I also observed that they both looked of about my own age, or perhaps younger, and that they were greatly alike in stature, manner, voice, and, as far as I could tell, face. "You are Dr. Manette," said one. "I am." "Dr. Manette, formerly of Beauvais," said the other. "The young physician, originally an expert surgeon, who within the last year or two has made a rising reputation in Paris?" "Gentlemen," I told them, "I am that Dr. Manette, of whom you speak so graciously." "We have been to your residence," said the first, "and not being so fortunate as to find you there, and being informed that you were probably walking in this direction, we followed in the hope of overtaking you. Will you enter the carriage?" The manner of both was so imperious, and they both moved as these words were spoken, so as to place me between themselves and the carriage door. They were armed. I was not. "Gentlemen," I said, "pardon me, but I usually inquire who does me the honor to seek my assistance, and what is the nature of the case to which I am summoned?" The reply to this was made by him who had spoken second. "Doctor, your clients are people of condition. As to the nature of the case, our confidence in your skill assures us that you will ascertain it for yourself better than we can describe. Enough. Will you please enter the carriage?" I could do nothing but comply, and I entered it in silence. They both entered after me, the last springing in after putting up the steps. The carriage turned about and drove on at its former speed. I repeat this conversation exactly as it occurred. I have no doubt that it is word for word the same. I describe everything as it took place, constraining my mind not to wander from the task. Where I make the broken marks that follow here, I leave off for a time and put my paper in its hiding place. The carriage left the streets behind, passed the North Barrier, and emerged upon the country road. At 2/3 of a league from the barrier, I did not estimate the distance at that time, but afterwards, when I traversed it, it turned and struck out of the main avenue, and presently stopped at a solitary house. We all three alighted, and walked by a damp, soft footpath in a garden where a neglected fountain had overflowed to the door of the house. It was not opened immediately in answer to the ringing of the bell, and one of my two conductors struck the man who opened it with his heavy riding glove across his face. There was nothing in this action to attract my particular attention, for I had seen common people struck more commonly than dogs. But the other of the two, being angry likewise, struck the man in the same manner with his arm. The look and bearing of the brothers were then so exactly alike that I then first perceived them to be twins. From the time of our alighting at the outer gate, which we found locked, and which one of the brothers had opened to admit us and then relocked, I heard cries proceeding from an upper chamber. I was conducted to this chamber straight, the cries growing louder as we went up the stairs, and I found a patient in a high fever of the brain lying on the bed. This patient was a woman of great beauty, and young, assuredly not much past 20. Her hair was torn and ragged, and her arms were bound to her sides with handkerchiefs. I noticed that these bonds were all portions of a gentleman's dress. On one of them, which was a fringed scarf for a dress of ceremony, I saw an armorial bearing of a noble and the letter E. I saw this within my first minute of contemplation of the patient, for in her restlessness she had turned over on her face on the edge of the bed and had drawn the end of the scarf into her mouth and was in danger of suffocation. My first act was to put my hand to relieve her breathing, and in moving the scarf aside, the embroidery on the corner of it caught my sight. I turned her gently over and placed my hands upon her breast to calm her and keep her down, and looked into her face. Her eyes were dilated and wild, and she constantly uttered piercing shrieks, saying the words, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and then counted up to 12, and I said, "Hush." For an instant, and no more, she would pause and listen, and then the shrieks would begin again, and she would repeat the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and would count up to 12, and then say, "Hush." There was no variation in order or manner. There was no ceasing, but the regular momentary pause and the utterance of these words. "How long," I asked, "has this lasted?" To distinguish between the brothers, I will call them the elder and the younger. By the elder, I mean him who exercised the most authority. It was he who replied, "Since about this hour last night." "She has a husband, a father, and a brother?" "A brother." "Do I not address her brother?" The man answered with the greatest of contempt, "No." "Does she have some recent association with the number 12? The younger impatiently said, "With 12 o'clock?" "See here, gentlemen," I said, still keeping my hands upon her chest, "how useless I am as you have brought me. If I had known what I was coming to see, I could have come provided. As it is, time must be lost. There are no medicines to be obtained in this lonely place." The elder looked to the younger, who said haughtily, "There's a case of medicine here," and brought it from a closet and put it upon the table. Here the narrative pauses again. I opened some of the bottles and smelt them and put the stoppers to my lips. If I had wanted to use anything save narcotic medicines that were poisons in themselves, I would not have administered any of these. "Do you doubt them?" said the younger brother. "You see, monsieur, I am going to use them," I said, and said no more. I made the patient swallow with great difficulty, and after many efforts, the dose that I desired to give. As I intended to repeat it after a while, and as it was necessary to watch its influence, I then sat down by the side of the bed. There was a timid and suppressed woman in attendance, perhaps the wife of the man downstairs, who had retreated into a corner. The house was damp and decayed, indifferently furnished, evidently recently occupied and temporarily used. Some thick old hangings had been nailed up in front of the windows to deaden the sound of the shrieks. They continued to be uttered in their regular succession with the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," the counting to 12, and then, "Hush." The frenzy was so violent that I had not unfastened the bandages restraining the arms, but I had looked to them to see that they were not painful. The only spark of encouragement in the case was that my hand upon her chest had much soothing influence, that for minutes at a time it tranquilized the figure. It had no effect upon the cries. No pendulum could have been more regular. For the reason that my hand had this effect, I assume, I had sat by the side of the bed for half an hour with the brothers looking on before the elder said, "There is another patient." I was startled and said, "Is it a pressing case?" "You'd better come see," he carelessly answered, and took up a light. The other patient lay in a back room across a second staircase, which was a species of loft over a stable. There was a low plastered ceiling to a part of it. The rest was open to the ridge of the tiled roof, and there were beams across. Hay and straw were stored in the portion of the place, with wood for firing and a heap of apples in sand. I had to pass through that part to get at the other. My memory is circumstantial and unshaken. I try it with these details, and I see them all in this my cell in the Bastille, near the close of the 10th year of my captivity, as I saw it that night. On some hay on the ground, with a cushion thrown under his head, lay a handsome peasant boy, a boy of not more than 17 at most. He lay on his back with his teeth set, his right hand clenched, and his glaring eyes looking straight upward. I could not see where his wound was as I kneeled on one knee over him, but I could see that he was dying of a wound from a sharp point. "I am a doctor, my poor fellow," I said. "Let me examine it." "I do not want it examined," he said. "Let it be." It was under his hand, and I soothed him to let me move his hand away. It was a sword thrust, received from 20 to 24 hours before, but no skill could have saved him if it had been looked to without delay. Now he was dying fast. As I turned my eyes to the elder brother, I saw him looking down at this handsome boy whose life was ebbing out as if he were a wounded bird or hare or rabbit, not as if he were a fellow human. "How has this been done, monsieur?" I said. "A crazed common dog. A serf forced my brother to draw upon him, and has fallen by my brother's sword like a gentleman." There was no touch of pity, sorrow, or humanity in this answer. The speaker seemed to acknowledge that it was inconvenient to have that different order of creature dying there, and that it would have been better if he had died in the usual obscure routine of his vermin kind. The man was quite incapable of any compassionate feeling about the boy or his fate. The boy's eyes had slowly moved to him as he had spoken, and now slowly moved to me. "Doctor, they are very proud, these nobles. But we common dogs are proud too sometimes. They plunder us, outrage us, beat us, kill us, but we have a little pride left sometimes. Have you seen her, doctor?" The shrieks and the cries were audible there, though subdued by distance. He referred to them as if she were in our presence. I said, "I have seen her. She is my sister, doctor. They have had their shameful rights, these nobles, in the modesty and virtue of our sisters many years, but we have had good girls among us. I know it, and have heard my father say so. She was a good girl. She was betrothed to a good young man, a tenant of his. We were all tenants of his, that man who stands there. The other is his brother, the worst of a bad race." It was with the greatest difficulty that the boy gathered bodily force to speak, but his spirit spoke with emphasis. "We were so robbed by that man who stands there, as all we common dogs are by those superior beings, taxed by him without mercy, obliged to work without pay, obliged to grind our corn at his mill, obliged to feed scores of his tame birds upon our wretched crops, and forbidden for our lives to keep a single tame bird of our own, pillaged and plundered to that degree that when we chanced to have a bit of meat, we ate it in fear with the door barred and shutters closed, that his people should not see it and take it from us. I say we were so robbed and hunted and made so poor that our father told us it was a dreadful thing to bring a child into the world, and that what we should most pray for was that our women might be barren and our miserable race die out. I had never before seen the sense of being oppressed bursting forth like a fire. I had supposed that it must be latent in the people somewhere, but I had never seen it break out until I saw it in the dying boy. Nevertheless, doctor, my sister married. He was ailing at that time, the poor fellow, and she married her lover that she might tend and comfort him in our cottage, our dog hut, as that man calls it. She had not been married many weeks when that man's brother saw and admired her, and asked that man to lend her to him. For what are husbands amongst us? He was willing. But my sister was good and virtuous and hated his brother with a hatred as strong as mine. What did the two then do to persuade her husband to use his influence and make her willing? The boy's eyes, which had been fixed on mine, slowly turned, and I saw in the two faces that all he said was true. The two opposing kinds of pride confronting one another, I can see even in this Bastille, the gentleman's, all negligent indifference, and the peasants, all downtrodden and passionate revenge. You know, doctor, that it is among the rights of these nobles to harness our common dogs to carts and drive us. They harnessed him and drove him. You know it is among their rights to keep us on their grounds all night, quieting the frogs in order that their noble sleep might not be disturbed. They kept him out on the unwholesome nights and ordered him back into his harness in the day. But he was not persuaded. No, taken out of harness one day at noon to feed, if he could find food, he sobbed 12 times, one for every stroke of the bell, and then he died on her bosom. Nothing could have held that boy to life except for his determination to tell all of this. He forced back the gathering shadows of death as he forced his clenched hand to remain clenched and covering his wound. Then, with that man there's permission, and even with his aid, his brother took her away, in spite of what I know she must have told him, and what that is will not be long unknown to you, doctor, if it is now. His brother took her away for his pleasure and diversion for a little while. I saw her pass me on the road. When I took the tidings home, our father's heart burst. He never spoke one of the words that filled it. I took my young sister, for I have another, to a place beyond the reach of this man, and where at least she will never be his vassal. Then I tracked the brother here, and last night I climbed in, a common dog, but with a sword in hand. Where's the loft window? It was somewhere here. The room was darkening in his sight. The world was narrowing around him. I looked around and saw that the hay and straw were trampled over the floor as if there had been a struggle. She heard me and ran in. I told her not to come near us until he was dead. He came first, and he tossed me some pieces of money and then struck at me with a whip. But I, though a common dog, so struck at him as to make him draw. Let him break into as many pieces as he will. The sword that he stained with my common blood, he drew to defend himself, and he thrust at me with all of his skill for his life. My glance had fallen but a few moments before on the fragments of a broken sword lying among the hay. The weapon was a gentleman's. In another place lay an old sword that seemed to have been a soldier's. Now lift me up, doctor, lift me up. Where is he? He is not here, I said, supporting the boy and thinking that he was referring to the brother. He, proud as these nobles are, he is afraid to see me. Where is the man who was here? Turn my face to him. I did this, raising the boy's head against my knee. But invested for the moment with extraordinary power, he raised himself completely, obliging me to rise too, or I could not have supported him. "Marquis," said the boy, turned to him with eyes opened wide and his right hand raised. "In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon you and yours, to the last of your bad race, to answer for them. I mark this cross of blood upon you as a sign that I do it. In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon your brother, the worst of the bad race, to answer for them separately. I mark this cross of blood upon him as a sign that I do it." Twice he put his hand to the wound in his breast, and with his forefinger drew a cross in the air. He stood for an instant with the finger yet raised, and as it dropped, he dropped with it, and I laid him down. He was dead. When I returned to the bedside of the young woman, I found her raving in precisely the same order. I knew that this might last for many hours, and that it would probably end with the silence of the grave. I repeated the medicines I had given her, and I sat at the side of the bed until the night was well advanced. She never abated the piercing quality of her shrieks, never stumbled in the distinctness or order of her words. They were always, "My husband, my father, and my brother. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, hush!" This lasted 26 hours from the time when I first saw her. I had come and gone twice, and I was again sitting by her when she began to falter. I did what little could be done to assist that opportunity, and by she sank into a lethargy and lay like the dead. It was as if the wind and rain had lulled at last after a long, fearful storm. I released her arms and called the woman to assist me to compose her figure and the dress that she had torn. It was then I knew her condition to be that of one in whom the first expectations of being a mother has arisen, and it was then that I lost the little hope I had for her. "Is she dead?" said the Marquis, who I will still describe as the elder brother, coming booted into the room from his horse. "Not dead," I said, "but likely to die." "What strength there is in these common bodies," he said, looking at her with curiosity. "There is much strength," I told him, "in sorrow and despair." He first laughed at my words and then frowned at them. He moved a chair with his foot near to mine and ordered the woman away and said quietly, "Doctor, finding my brother in this difficulty with these hinds, I recommended that your aid should be invited. Your reputation is high, and as a young man with your fortune to make, you are probably mindful of your interest. The things you see here are things to be seen and not spoken of." I listened to my patient breathing, and I avoided answering. "Do you honor me with your attention, doctor?" "Monsieur," I said, "in my profession, the communications of patients are always received in confidence." I was guarded in my answer, for I was troubled in my mind by what I had heard and seen. Her breathing was so difficult to trace that I carefully tried the pulse and heart. There was life, and no more. Looking around as I sat back down, I found both the brothers intent upon me. Later. I write with so much difficulty. The cold is so severe. I am fearful of being detected and consigned to an underground cell and in total darkness, so I must abridge this narrative. There is no confusion or failure in my memory. It can recall and could detail every word that was ever spoken between me and those brothers. She lingered for a week. Towards the last, I could understand a few syllables that she said to me, By placing my ear close to her lips, she asked me where she was, and I told her who I was. It was in vain that I asked for her family name. She faintly shook her head upon the pillow and kept her secret as had the boy. I had no opportunity of asking her any questions until I had told the brothers she was sinking fast and probably would not live another day. Until then, though no one was ever presented to her consciousness save the woman and myself, one or the other of them had always jealously sat behind the curtain at the head of the bed when I was there. But when it came to that, they seemed careless what communication I might hold with her. It's as if, the thought passed through my mind, as if I were dying as well. I always observed their pride bitterly resented the younger brother, as I call him, for having crossed swords with a peasant, and that peasant a boy. The only consideration that appeared really to affect the mind of either of them was the consideration that this was highly degrading to the family and was ridiculous. As often as I caught the younger brother's eyes, their expression reminded me that he disliked me deeply, for knowing what I knew from the boy. He was smoother and more polite than the elder, but I saw this. I saw also that I was an encumbrance in the mind of the elder. My patient died 2 hours before midnight, at a time by my watch answering almost to the minute of when I had first seen her. I was alone with her, when her forlorn young head dropped gently to one side and all of her earthly sorrows ended. The brothers were waiting in a room downstairs, impatient to ride away. I had heard them alone at the bedside, striking their boots with their whips and loitering up and down. "At last is she dead?" said the elder. "She is dead." "I congratulate you, my brother," were his words as he turned round. He had before offered me money, which I had postponed taking. He now gave me a rouleau of gold. I took it from his hand, but laid it upon the table. I had considered, and had resolved to accept nothing. "Pray excuse me," I said. "Under the circumstances, no." They exchanged looks, but bent their heads to me as I bent mine to them, and we parted without another word. I am weary, worn down with misery. I cannot even read what I have written with this gaunt hand. Early the next morning, the rouleau of gold was left at my door in a little box with my name on the outside. From the first, I had anxiously considered what I ought to do. I decided that day to write privately to the minister, stating the nature of the two cases to which I had been summoned and the place to which I had gone, in effect stating all the circumstances. I knew what court influence was, and what the immunities of nobles were, and I expected that the matter would never be heard of, but I wished to relieve my own mind. I had kept the matter a profound secret, even from my wife, and this, too, I resolved to say in my letter. I had no apprehension whatever of my real danger, but I was conscious that there might be a danger for others if they were compromised by possessing the knowledge I did. I was much engaged that day, and could not complete my letter that night. I rose long before my usual time the next morning to finish it. It was the last day of the year. The letter was lying before me, just completed, when I was told that a lady was waiting who wished to see me. I am growing more and more unequal to the task I have set myself. It is so cold, so dark, my senses are so benumbed, and the gloom in me is so dreadful. The young lady was engaging and handsome, but not marked for a long life. She was in great agitation. She presented herself to me as the wife of the Marquis Saint-Evremond. I connected the title by which the boy had addressed the elder brother, and the initial letter that was embroidered on the scarf, and I had no difficulty in arriving at the conclusion that I had seen this noblewoman's husband very recently. My memory is still accurate, but I cannot write the words of our conversation. I suspect that I am watched more closely than I was, and I know not at what times I may be watched. She had a part that she had suspected, and in part she had discovered the main facts of the cruel story, and of her husband's share in it, and my being resorted to. She did not know that the girl was dead. Her hope had been, she said, in great distress, to show her in secret a woman's sympathy. Her hope had been to avert the wrath of heaven from a house that had long been hateful to the suffering masses. She had reason for believing there was a younger sister living, and her greatest desire was to help that sister. I could tell her nothing, but that there was a sister. Beyond that, I knew no more. Her inducement to come to me, relying on my confidence, had been in the hope that I could tell her the name and place, whereas to this wretched hour I am ignorant of both. These scraps of paper, they fail me. One was taken from me with a warning yesterday. I must finish this today. She was a good and compassionate lady, and not happy in her marriage. How could she be? The brother distrusted and disliked her, and his influence was all opposed to her. She stood in dread of him, and in dread of her husband as well. When I handed her down to the door, there was a child, a pretty boy, between 2 and 3 years old, in her carriage. "For his sake, doctor," she said, pointing to him in tears, "I would do all I can to make what poor amends that I can. He will never prosper in his inheritance otherwise. I have a presentiment that if no other innocent atonement is made for this, it will one day be required of him. What I have left to call my own, it is little beyond a few jewels. I will make it the first charge of his life to bestow, with compassion and the lamenting of his dead mother, upon this injured family, if the sister can be found." She kissed the boy and said, "It is for thy own dear sake. Will you be faithful, little Charles?" And the child said yes. I kissed her hand, and she took him in her arms and went away. I never saw her again. As she had mentioned her husband's name in the faith that I knew it, I made no mention of it in my letter. I sealed it, not trusting it out of my own hands, and I delivered it myself that day. That night, the last night of the year, towards 9 o'clock, a man in black dress rang at my gate and demanded to see me, and softly followed my servant, Ernest Defarge, up the stairs. When my servant came into the room where I sat with my wife, oh, my wife, beloved of my heart, my fair young English wife, we saw the man who was supposed to be at the gate standing behind Ernst. "An urgent case in the Rue Saint-Anne," he said. It would not detain me, he told me. He had a coach waiting. It brought me here. It brought me to my grave. When I was clear of the house, a black muffler was drawn tightly over my mouth from behind. My arms were pinioned. The two brothers crossed the road from a dark corner and identified me with a single gesture. The Marquis took from his pocket the letter I had written and showed it to me, burnt in the light of the lantern he held, and then extinguished the ashes with his foot. Not a word was spoken. I was brought here to my living grave. If it had pleased God to put it in the hard heart of either of those brothers in all these frightful years to grant me any tidings of my wife, so much as to let me know by a word whether she was alive or dead, I might have thought that he had not quite abandoned me. But now I believe, that the mark of the Red Cross is fatal to them, and that they have no part in God's mercies. And them and their descendants, to the very last of their race, I, Alexander Marnet, unhappy prisoner, do this night of the year 1767, in my unbearable agony, denounce to the times when all of these things will be answered for. I denounce them to heaven and to earth. A terrible sound arose when the reading of this document was done. A sound of craving and eagerness that had nothing articulate in it but blood. The narrative called up the most revengeful passions of the time, and there was not a head in the nation but must have dropped before it. Little need, in the presence of that tribunal and that auditory, to show how the Defarges had not made the paper public with the other captured Bastille memorials, and that they had kept it, biding their time. Little need to show that this detested family name had long been hated by Saint Antoine and was wrought into the fatal register. The man never trod the ground whose virtues and services would have sustained him in that place that day against this denunciation. And all the worse for the doomed man that the denouncer was a well-known citizen, his friend, and the father of his wife. One of the frenzied aspirations of the populace was for imitations of the questionable public virtue of antiquity, and for sacrifices and self-immolation on that people's altar. Therefore, when the president said that the good physician of the Republic would deserve better still of the Republic by rooting out an obnoxious family of aristocrats, and would doubtless feel a sacred glow and joy in making his daughter and her child both widow and orphan, that there was a wild excitement, patriotic fervor, and not a touch of human sympathy. Much influence around him, doesn't he have, that doctor? Murmured Madame Defarge, smiling at the vengeance. Save him now, my doctor. Save him. At every juryman's vote there was a roar, another and another, roar and roar. Unanimously voted. At heart, and by descent an aristocrat, an enemy of the Republic, a notorious oppressor of the people, back to the concierge, and death within 24 hours for Charles Darnay. And that was not what I was expecting, but it is the end of the chapter. I was expecting the letter to be bad, but for whatever reason, I really thought that the woman on the bed was going to end up being Charles Darnay's mother. Like, somehow that she would make it 9 months and give birth, and that was going to be some sort of shameful secret. I don't know. Ugh. I mean, I don't know what I think. I feel for the doctor, but at the same time, I don't think Charles Darnay deserves to lose his head for his uncle and father's crimes. We'll just have to wait and see when we rejoin this story on Saturday. So, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter, and I will see you Saturday.